Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have vowed to take away your Second Amendment rights through gun bans, gun confiscation, and government regulations. Now, Joe Biden is no longer hiding his real intentions, and we need you to take action now.
Whether it's a 9mm pistol or whether it's a rifle is ridiculous. I'm continuing to push to eliminate the sale of those things. But
the Biden administration is coming after your right to own any gun. Joe Biden has already issued executive orders.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Weekly Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today are a special guest, Sean Campbell of the Arsenal Media Group, Rob Morse of Self-Defense Gun Stories and the Slow Facts blog, and our usual Friday guest on the Daily Bullet, Alex Ooley of the Ooley Law Offices in Indiana. And getting started, we want to utilize our guest today because we've got a little bit of limited time with him, Sean Campbell. Sean is with Arsenal Media Group, and Sean, you were introduced to me as somebody in the somewhat on the periphery of the movie industry, but you've got connections and you know how things work on the media, on the movie sets, as far as what happens in the background. And you live in Arizona and have worked around movie sets before, not necessarily with the big productions, but with independent movies and such. And there's one thing that is broke in the news this week is New Mexico, where the tragedy happened on the Rust movie set. In New Mexico, there's a bill that was proposed this week that all actors that are going to be handling firearms in New Mexico must go through firearms training. And I honestly think, as somebody that, I honestly think that all restrictions on our Second Amendment rights are unnecessary, if not an infringement, period. I don't like anything that restricts anybody's right to use a firearm as they deem necessary. And people on the gun rights side seem to be cheering this because it seems to be going after Alec Baldwin, who has traditionally been anti-gun rights. I'm going to take Alec Baldwin's side on this one, in that this is a law that really doesn't need to go through. Sean, you've been around the movie industry for quite a while. Is this law necessary?
I don't think the law itself is necessary. I think the basic premise of actors taking steps to take firearm safety is necessary. If SAG themselves wanted to basically implement something in their rules and when it comes to indie films like this, where Alec Baldwin's producing it, right, this isn't an indie where we would be making it with a group of people that we just happen to all know each other in Arizona. This is still an indie film that's propped up by Hollywood, so SAG rules applies. These were union members until the last day. Everybody has to remember that we're on set. So if the union themselves wants to say, look, if you're going to do movies that require you to operate firearms, we want you to go through X amount of hours to operate firearms. I don't think the rule obviously should apply to ownership. If I haven't had an opportunity to look at the bill. If the bill would all obviously apply to any type of ownership of firearms, then I wouldn't support that. And I don't think it's necessary to create a bill. I think it should just be common sense. If at the same time, we've had like 2 accidents, or we've had two incidents now in, I believe, 30 years, 28 years, something like that. So we've got Brandon, and then we have the DP, the young girl who recently passed. So I think this is more an issue of Hollywood just needing to be aware that they've built a culture around firearms, basically taking advantage of firearms while also propping them up as evil, bad, scary things. This is just one of those things where New Mexico's, to me, it just sounds like more virtue signaling than it is actually trying to accomplish something on set. On set would be the DP, the director, the producers, the armorers, the prop masters, the weapons masters. All these people should have been there to protect their crew, and that's what happens on every set. If me as a DP, right? I mean, we now know that there were other incidences that had occurred prior to what led to Alec Baldwin, right? No competent armorer or weapons master or director or DP would allow for that to even occur. The minute that one of those incidents happened, the set would be shut down and discussions would be had. So the bill, I don't think is necessary. We went almost 3 decades after Brandon without a single death by firearm. You are literally more likely to die by falling off a ladder as a gaffer on a set, or get hit by a light that falls off a set, or be in a Michael Bay film and a helicopter flies into you or something of that nature.
Yeah.
Then you are die by a firearm on set. So I do agree that, yes, actors should 100% be proactive, and if SAG wants to put those rules into the union, that's fine. But I don't think a bill is necessary. I don't think it's really going to accomplish anything. If anything, it might just provoke less movies and less revenue for New Mexico.
Let me get a couple comments in here very fast. McClifford on the Facebook side absolutely agrees with you. Just popped an amen in there. And Gerald has an interesting comment. Movie sets should be required to use a true prop gun, not functional.
So number one, prop gun isn't a thing. So the word prop means everything on set that is basically created for the film. So prop gun does not equal fake. So I want to make sure that that's clear, because the media, when this first came out, they continued to use the word prop gun as if that was some type of real thing. There are a number of different types of fake firearms or non-commissioned firearms that are incapable of firing. However, they are not always prop guns. So we gotta move away from that stigma and help society understand that like whatever prop is sitting next to the prop gun is a prop. A real firearm is a prop gun. So it doesn't matter if it fires, or if it's non-commissioned, or if it is actually, let's say, silicone or whatever material it's made out of. It's still a prop.
Sean, would you straighten us out on that? If it doesn't move, it's a piece of set, and if it moves, it's a property.
It's still
and a prop master. Oh,
it doesn't make a difference if it moves or doesn't move. It stands for property of production. Yeah.
The property master, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
So the prop masters can technically be. You can have set masters, prop masters, and they could be responsible for different props on set. But yeah, everything is a prop on set. So a prop gun can very much still be a live firearm.
Thank you.
Well, and if I could have you address one more thing real quick, and that is this. We, right now, the camera I am looking into is a $90 camera that I bought off of Amazon probably 5 years ago, and it was not top of the line then, but it certainly gets the job done today for an internet broadcast, and it is still a better quality camera than anything that was available in the 1970s. What they're broadcasting, what they're recording with today, the movie cameras, and we're talking the pickup ability of these cameras is stunning, the quality of picture they can provide. A fake gun can be picked up and picked apart when they go to actual production. It's if you go 4K and above, 8K, it's stunningly easy to see what's plastic and what's metal when you get to the finished product. I would think you've got the pressure to use the real thing in filming is really high. Can you speak to that at all?
That's part of it. Obviously, you could take there are companies that specialize in taking real firearms and decommissioning them so that they can't fire live rounds. So that's not so much the issue. The issue that like a director or a DP like myself would have is that when firearms are necessary on set, because we typically use a mix, right? We use both. We do use decommission, we use silicone base, and all the other ones, real firearms as well. The reason on certain scenes where you would want to use real firearms, if you've ever watched something, I'm trying to think like the cheesiest thing that comes to mind would be like laser pistol, like Starship Trooper stuff, old 80s stuff. They were still obviously using real firearms, very much so. But you can tell the difference, obviously, from the recoil, right? And that's the big thing as a director or a director of photography or cinematographer. When it comes to trying to simulate that, it's difficult for even method actors who have no experience, especially with firearms. They don't know what that firearm is capable unless they actually fire it. So to get their actual reaction when that recoil comes back, that's something you want to capture on film. And that's a lot of times why they either want to use a real firearm or a decommissioned real firearm. So besides the fact that the obvious that it looks real rather than silicone, so on and so forth.
I did notice that this was basically the hunter safety course for New Mexico. What's odd is that it's a one and done. If you ever took one. Now, what's interesting, Sean, you could be an NRA firearms instructor, but you hadn't because movie crews move all over. If you hadn't taken the New Mexico hunter safety, you're not qualified. It looks like they're trying to find the equivalent of a driver's license before you drive a vehicle on set.
Right, and that's where I think that it would more or less push. Ironically, it would probably push more films to be made in my state, because I live in a desert state. So that's not bad for Arizona film industry. It's bad for New Mexico because there are budgetary constraints, and you can still have a really great armor. You can still go out and get a really great weapons master and props master. You can't always, not every movie is going to be John Wick, right, where you've got Terran Tactical training the actors who primarily handle the firearms. Now, Terran didn't obviously run through like every single actor, but I can name like over 10 actors over the course of like the last 5 to 10 years that have gone through different training from Terran Tactical and some of the big names that are out there. Some of them they've even gone out, like Michelle Rodriguez. She's gone out and done it on her own on several occasions, to the point where now she enjoys it. It's my understanding through the industry, both on the film side and the 2A side, that she's really good. That includes Halle Berry as well. I've heard she's an excellent marksman. So there are actors that do it, and they take those extra precautions. But also day one, typically, so day one, and almost every day, this is something you go through. The weapons master or the armor, depending on who's handling that, they go through firearm safety as it is. I don't know if anybody saw that like Will Smith video that was going around, where he picks up the firearm from one of the crew members, and he talks about gun safety and whatnot on set. That's kind of what it's like. Everybody's kind of hurtled around, either outside or in a room, and then the weapons masters, it could be in firearms instructors. It depends on like the budgetary constraints, what type of movie it is. But they actually walk you through gun safety and what not to do, and the basic principles, which is, number one, you don't point a firearm. You just assume it's always loaded. You don't point a firearm at anyone until obviously it's been checked by you and multiple people, and then basically the director and the DP gives you the go-ahead. So. Yeah. And that's where I think, in general, this should really. You mentioned like conservatives and Alec Baldwin. Like, I get it. I know you and I, Paul, we off stream we had this conversation, and I don't think by any means that Alec Baldwin meant to do this, and then triggering this whole New Mexico thing. But I think I'm 100% behind, obviously, Alec Baldwin paying for his crime, both financially, obviously, and through the court system, because. If I had done this on set as an actor or a human, or you or anybody here, we'd be in handcuffs right now and waiting trials. So it's kind of gross that way, the way Hollywood works. But and then Alec Baldwin having the power, obviously, to trigger a bill, it's just simply not necessary, and it could honestly just hurt New Mexico State. It's kind of gross. It hurts filmmakers. We want safety for our crew. We want to make sure that people understand gun safety, especially those who are terrified. They're terrified to be around firearms, but they need to know if they're going to come on set and they're going to take that job. You know, if you're working on a Western, or especially New Mexico and Arizona, these are the two states where a lot of Westerns are made. You need to understand that you're going to be around these firearms, and there's going to be directors who, simply put, do not want to use fake firearms. They want authenticity, and they've been getting it for decades and decades and decades. And we have not had that many incidents. We have had more incidents, literally, whether it be stunts or basically just equipment malfunctioning and falling and hurting and killing people on sets.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've kind of wrapped around that one, Sean. I know you're not don't have a ton of time, but I want to thank you for taking your time to talk to us today, man.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Nice to see you.
All right. We're going to go ahead and let Sean go. Then we've got a lot of news to get to here. Let's go ahead and Rob and Alex. What I want to start with, on Thursday, we had President Biden travel to New York City, and of course, we all know New York City is the epicenter of freedom in the United States, right?
That's right. The exact opposite, more like it, right?
Yeah, and he wanted to talk about gun control and basically deride us for not doing enough to stop gun violence in the country.
All right, let's hear it, buddy.
Yeah, I've got two clips out of that talk. The talk was about an hour long. I picked out the two most egregious examples of what he was saying, and I pulled two clips out of his talk. And before anybody goes to put me, because this happens almost every time I do this, somebody tries to do a copyright claim. I got this off the whitehouse.gov YouTube feed, which is by and of itself public domain. So back off, okay? Anyway, here we go. Here's the first clip.
He is also a loss for the nation. You know, speech was cut short by a man with a stolen Glock. It's 40 rounds. The magazine is 40 rounds. And it's really a weapon of war. One of the things I was proudest of years ago when I was in the Senate, I was able to get these weapons and the size of magazines outlawed. That got changed, got overruled, but I don't see any rationale why there should be such a weapon able to be purchased. It doesn't violate anybody's Second Amendment rights to deny that of it.
Yes, actually, Biden, it does violate Second Amendment rights to deny anybody the right to purchase whatever they choose to. And as Alex and I talked about yesterday on the Daily Bullet, the assault weapons ban was not overturned. It was not. It was sunsetted. What he claims he worked so hard for, there was a 10-year restriction built into the law, and if that law wasn't effective, it was just going to go away unless it was renewed. And at the end of the 10 years, when the lawmakers looked back at it, look, it did nothing, and there wasn't the support to renew it, so it wasn't renewed. I don't know, okay. Rob, Alex.
Well, go ahead, Alex. I'll back clean up.
Oh, sure. So, yeah, like we talked about last night, Paul, I mean, it was sunsetted. It wasn't overturned, and it was sunsetted because there wasn't support for it, largely because it didn't achieve the goals that it was supposedly supposed to accomplish. And AR-15, the AR-15 rifle is the most commonly chosen rifle for self-defense. So to say that banning these sorts of arms doesn't deny anybody of their rights protected by the Second Amendment, I think, is just out of touch.
Well, what's interesting is the AR it's hard to hide it under your coat. It's hard to put it in your pocket. It's almost never used in a crime. There are exceptions, I'll grant you. Vast majority of criminals aren't interested in trying to lug an AR around. What I think, I'm trying to understand the political motivations. Why would Biden make this speech? He's trying to indemnify New York politicians for the frightening levels of violence in their city. They have to explain it to the populace. Hey, other states aren't this mess. Other cities aren't the mess that we see in New York. Oh, it's not horrible political policies. Oh, it's just guns. And we tried to do something about it, but those bad other people kept us from doing things that, as you point out, Alec, didn't work.
Yeah, it's just the typical example of the government setting up a boogeyman to protect us against for public safety. Yeah.
Well,
so here's the.
I think it's more than just to protect us and to justify an infringement. It's to protect the politicians who've done some really horrible things. I mean, there are terrible policies. People are leaving New York State and New York City, and now they need an excuse as to why it's someone else's fault.
Mm-hmm. And of course, it won't work. And the policies that they implemented before, the restrictions they implemented before, will not have been enough, and they'll try to make.
And therefore, we need more of things that don't work.
Exactly.
All right, I got one more clip. This is 1 minute long, and this is the doozy. This is the one that I went off on yesterday. I'm going to go off on again today. This is the big one that Biden let slip yesterday.
Cisco. First, we want to crack down on the flow of firearms used to commit violence. That includes taking on and shutting down rogue gun dealers. And it's about doing background checks, as well as outright selling, making sure that people who are not allowed to have a gun don't get the gun in the first place. And again, for any of the press listeners, this doesn't violate anybody's Second Amendment right. There's no violation of a Second Amendment right. We talk like there's no amendment that's absolute. When the amendment was passed, it didn't say anybody can own a gun and any kind of gun and any kind of weapon. You couldn't buy a cannon when this amendment was passed. And so no reason why you should be able to buy certain assault weapons. But that's another issue.
All right. There are two parts to this. One that I didn't catch until just now, and then I'll go off on this second. The first one is rogue gun dealers. Folks, I honestly believe what he means by that is he wants to ban entirely the private sale of firearms. That means if Rob is all of a sudden really enamored by my Smith & Wesson Shield that I carry on a daily basis, and he really likes it, even though I know Rob's a good guy, that Rob's going to pass any background check because he's got a concealed carry permit. He's already passed a background check. He showed me his concealed carry permit. I know it's not going to be a problem. I still can't sell to him because the federal government says that's not okay. If I did, I would be a rogue gun dealer. That's the first thing. He wants to ban all private sales of firearms, is I think what that means. I cannot, and I don't want to slip inside Joe Biden's head. The second thing, and the really big one, is that the Second Amendment never has meant that you could buy anything you wanted. And again, this is going back to yesterday. I took a few notes. The Battle of Lexington and Concord, the shot heard around the world in April of 1775. The British are coming. The British are coming. The British were coming for the privately held cannons that the people of Concord had. And the orders were, if you cannot destroy the cannons, destroy the carriages that the cannons sit on, so they cannot be used. Now I'm gonna that in April 1775, that kicked off the American Revolutionary War. That lasted, the peace treaty that ended the American Civil War was in 1783. And then the American Constitution, as we know it now, was, including the Bill of Rights that includes the Second Amendment, was ratified in 1789. So it's from 1775 to 1789 is 13 years. Do you think in 13 years they might have remembered fairly clearly the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and the fact that not only could they own cannons back then, that they did, and they could even own private warships with multiple cannons on them? So, Mr. Biden, you and your speechwriters are full of it. I suggest a fast trip to the bathroom.
Yeah, and to your first point, Paul, about the rogue gun dealers, I think this is clearly a step toward universal background checks. So right now, if you purchase a firearm from an FFL, you have to undergo a background check through the FBI. But if I sell a firearm to somebody within my state, I don't have to go through, there doesn't have to be a background check conducted. It's just a private sale, and I'm free to sell to another individual. And what they're hoping to do, the gun control advocates, is to make sure that all those sales, even the private sales, involve a background check. And it's just a way to make sure that they can regulate the sale and transaction of arms, and to establish a backdoor registration system. And I think that's what he's really working toward. With respect to the, you can't just have whatever arm you want. It's not a right that's unlimited. I've got mixed feelings about this. I tend to agree with you. We talked about last night some of the language from the Heller decision, the Supreme Court decision from 2008, where Justice Scalia wrote the opinion, and he said, that the rights protected by the Second Amendment are not unlimited, but to some extent, they developed this common use test, and the idea is that the right that you have are to have those arms that were in common use at the time, and that means common use at the time of the founding, and then also in common use through today. And going back to the AR-15, that's an arm that it's the most popular style of rifle chosen for self-defense. So to say that the AR-15 is not in common use today is just an absurdity, and again shows that Biden is out of touch.
The stat I heard, for those of us who are influenced by numbers, is that there are more AR-15s in the population than there are Ford pickup trucks. So are you going to call an F-150 exotic? I think there's another political message here. There have been a number of task forces looking at rogue gun sales. Bloomberg did it, and now Schumer was trying to double the ATF budget so that they could one, politically they want to have people in the ATF beholding to Biden, and they will put you in jail if you miss a comma on the 4473. What's interesting to me is they're also effectively advocating for prohibition, as if that worked. We want to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. These are criminals who have their own narco submarines. You think they're walking down to the gun store?
Well, yeah, and
you're on drugs.
Prohibition worked so well in the 1930s, and the war on drugs has gone so well,
So, and let's just say there were universal background checks, this goes to your point, Rob. Are the criminals going to comply with that? The answer is obviously no. They're not going to go through a background check when they sell or trade arms.
One last thing. What people who are not familiar with firearms might not know. Firearms are a compromise. There are 1,000 compromises. Under the right circumstances, any commonly owned gun may be the best tool for the job, even, quote, a weapon of war. When guys were fighting in tunnels in Vietnam, I think they were using like suppressed 22s and 38s.
I know for sure they were using 45 handguns. They weren't using the M16s. They were too cumbersome to try and work around in there. They were using handguns.
My only point is that I don't want to tell my soldiers that they can't use a tool to save their lives. They're given a mission, let them choose the tools. But that means that virtually every firearm is a weapon of war under some conditions.
Yeah. Let me get up a couple comments here because we've got some really good ones coming in.
You say that as if you're surprised.
No, not at all. We've got some of the most brilliant listeners out there. Roderick says, about the supposed gun ban in 1994, didn't Rock River Arms start up around then with no flash suppressors, no bayonet lugs, and 10-round magazines? I can't speak to that. I'm not a Rock River Arms aficionado or a really fan. Never owned one, but I don't have anything against them either.
So-called featureless AR.
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat. I don't know the history of that company, so I can't speak to that.
And then going back to not selling, I can't sell to Rob or to Alex. Gerald says Oregon requires that unless it's a family member. Well, Rob, I consider you my brother.
That's right.
Yeah. If I can declare myself a female, I can declare Rob my brother, right?
Obviously, right. Family resemblance.
Well, we certainly got the same hairline.
It's obvious, right? Alex, on the other hand, is clearly.
Like you said, Paul, the other day when we were talking about who might replace Justice Breyer on the Supreme Court, you said before we know it, Pete Buttigieg will be the black female that Joe Biden has promised to get on the Supreme Court. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
But going back to, go ahead with the comment there, sorry.
Yeah, William on the Facebook site says the big push on gun control, bottom line is, out of fear of an armed revolution against their tyrannical government, they want total control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, and that goes to the universal background check issue, because, of course, the reason they want universal background checks is so that they can know who owns firearms, and so eventually they can take them away. And as we know, a common tool of tyrants throughout history has been to disarm the population, and they can only do that if they know who is armed. And so that's, of course, the great concern with universal background checks.
Yeah. I want to get one more comment in, and this is going to lead us to our next story, as it often does. I think not only are our viewers, listeners, incredibly smart, I think they've also got a good deal of ESP going.
They've hacked our show notes.
Gerald says background check on ammunition, like California, is a terrible thing for law-abiding citizens. Yeah, absolutely. It is. Anything they can do to slow down the process for our rights is a good thing for them. But that does lead us to our next story, and that story was covered on Thursday's Daily Bullet.
Okay, Paul, I wanted one comment here.
Yeah.
There was a judge, St. Benitez, so-called, in California, who looks at California's many infringements and says, you can pass the law. It doesn't work. Therefore, it's unconstitutional. You can claim there's a compelling state need. I'm looking at it. It didn't work. It's out of here. Anyway, interesting. So remember, if you can't, as you mentioned, Alec, not only did that the assault weapons ban get sunsetted because it didn't work, this judge said, if it doesn't, you claim this will work, it's been in effect, it didn't do what you said, therefore it's an infringement. Has to be.
And then speaking of California, I want to the next story that I want to talk about is California has a proposed law up now.
Oh, did you want to talk about the ATF?
Next, but I want to get to this one.
Great.
I want to get to this one up here now because it just fits in so well with Gerald's comment. There's a proposed law in California. If your child is in school, you must declare whether or not there is a firearm in your home. And that makes me absolutely incensed. When we talked about this on Thursday, I was telling Mike Piwowarski if I had a child and I was in California and subject to California laws, A, I'd be looking to move. B, if I couldn't, I'd be tempted to either lie or exaggerate the truth and say, look, I've got more weapons than probably you have in your entire arsenal for the state National Guard, and make them terrified of me.
Paul, I think this bill will cost lives. You're a single mom struggling to keep your life organized, and now you have to have a firearm safe. You have to declare. It's just not worth the hassle. But if we disarm just one person out of several thousand who might be a gun owner, that means they won't be armed when they face violent crime, and it costs lives. What the media tells you about the frequency of accidental school shootings or intentional school shootings, mass murder even, versus criminal violence and self-defense. Self-defense is so common that if you infringe it in the smallest way, you end up costing lives.
Yeah. And this, sorry, Paul, go ahead.
No, go.
Yeah, so my understanding is that this proposed law in California is in response to the school shooting in Michigan. And the idea, I think, is that if parents have to declare whether or not they have a firearm in the home, then they are basically going to target the children of those families to search their belongings, their backpack and whatnot. And I think that's problematic for lots of reasons, but one of the things that's so creepy about it is that it conditions the children to think that this sort of activity is normal and that they can just be subject to, frankly, unreasonable searches and seizures, using the nomenclature from the Fourth Amendment, for no reason at all, just because their parents happen to own a firearm. And I think that's a really bad part of this, in addition to what we've talked about already.
And don't think it'll stop there. They're also going to be subject to additional conditioning, additional education about how firearms are bad, how dangerous their parents are being by owning firearms.
Alex, I'm in round numbers, about 8 million firearms owners in California, the most firearms owners of any state in the Union. Is this is this bill that would affect school children narrowly tailored?
So that's a great question. So you're getting at an issue that's hopefully going to be addressed in the upcoming Supreme Court decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, which is what level of scrutiny should be applied to infringements on a right protected by the Second Amendment. And if the answer is that those sorts of infringements should be subject to strict scrutiny, those restrictions must be narrowly tailored to fit or to achieve a specific government goal, which here would be public safety. And I think they would have to have some data to support the measure showing that this sort of restriction, this sort of requirement, is narrowly tailored to achieve and will actually achieve the specific government goal of public safety. And I think not only is there very little data, I think there's probably no data to support that, and may even be to the contrary, like you said, because it will have the effect of costing lives by preventing people from exercising their rights and possessing a firearm. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, perfectly. And as I understand, the idea of narrowly tailoring a law is, we want to increase public safety. We have a problem with people operating vehicles in a way that's not safe. You can't outlaw vehicles.
Yeah.
You have to do it in the way that infringes the least.
Right. And the narrowly tailored concept is part of this interest balancing test. And the question is, what sort of right is being infringed? Is it a fundamental right, like the right to free speech, or is it a right that's a lesser right, like the privilege of driving on the road? So driving on the road doesn't have the same level of scrutiny applied to it as something like the right to free speech, and in my opinion, the right to bear arms under the Second Amendment. But what's interesting is there's some debate about whether an interest balancing approach should be applied to the Second Amendment at all, and I would argue that it shouldn't, because interest balancing is always subject to the whims of judges. They can make those interest balancing tests come out however they want. And the Second Amendment, I believe, should be subject to a text, history, and tradition standard, not an interest balance approach. And clearly, I think making parents declare whether or not they own a firearm isn't supported by any text, history, or tradition under the Second Amendment.
Well,
since far more people are killed with a DUI, you might ask parents, do you have alcohol in your home?
And I'm going to say, Rob, I think, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think I could prove this. There are even more than DUI. There are more people killed by people texting and driving. Do you own a cell phone?
I own a cell phone, right. A flip phone would be okay, the old style, but, these... gotcha.
No, you can still text with a flip phone, dude.
Oh, dude, things I learned at school. Okay.
And the problem, of course, with this is how are you going to enforce it? And that's going to be very problematic. And it's somewhat akin to a safe storage law. You've heard a lot about that in the news over the last several years. How would you enforce making families or individuals store their firearms in a safe manner without going into their home? And I think that just leads us into a bad place in terms of what sorts of searches gun owners may be subject to. Do they have lesser Fourth Amendment rights than everyone else simply because they own a firearm? I think that's a bad road to go down.
Yeah. Why don't we go ahead? Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, go. No, go.
I want to, if we could, because we're rapidly moving along in the show here. I really want to make sure we talk about this story off of Bearing Arms that Cam Edwards put up there. The ATF is creating a de facto registry. They have got quite literally millions and millions and millions of... They're keeping forever the records that they have, and they're requiring firearms. The 4473, there used to be a time period, I believe it was 10 years. After that, the firearms retailer could get rid of their part of the 4473.
Found book?
Yeah. Now they're saying, no, it's forever. And then because no gun store stays open, I mean, the forever. Eventually that goes to the ATF, and now the digital version goes to the ATF. Basically, the ATF is creating a registry of all firearms sales forever, and they're never going to give that up. This is, in my opinion, this directly goes against federal law, although there's some very creative attorneys that are saying it doesn't.
Yeah, this is I think, we mentioned it earlier in the show, it's that backdoor registration type system. So you're not voluntarily registering your firearm like you would a NFA item. If you purchase a suppressor, for instance, that is registered because you purchase it and you get a tax stamp and you have to apply through the ATF. But a firearm that you just purchase, a non-NFA item that you purchase at an FFL or from a private individual, it's not technically registered in any sort, but you have to undergo a background check. And they're basically compiling these background checks in a database and saying that that's not really a registry.
Now,
but it is, like you say, a de facto one.
Mm-hmm.
There are some states where, and you mentioned it, you could sell to me, Paul, person to person. What's true is that in some states, I can go with my concealed carry permit, I can walk into a gun store, and the states have made it so that that is in lieu of a background check. Hey,
South Dakota is one of them.
Good guy. Right. In theory, to get that carry permit, it was more than just the background check run by the FBI. There were local background checks as well. And therefore, that transfer would not be recorded by the ATF. And I can see more states, more red states, adopting a scheme like that. Do you agree?
And
yeah.
Speak up, guys. Nodding your head doesn't cut it.
Let me dovetail that by going back in this show a little bit, back to what Biden was, going against the rogue gun dealers, and I had said that it was dovetailing into, we want to ban all private sales of firearms.
Right.
If all private sales of firearms are banned and you've got to go through a gun store to do it, now they don't have a de facto, they've got a real gun registry.
Well, but Paul, there are some states where I can walk into a gun store and there's no, I don't get a background check because I've got this magic card. Different states have different schemes. I shouldn't use the word scheme, that's pejorative. Different methods. Alex.
Yeah, you asked if I thought more red states may adopt such a scheme. I hope so. I'm not sure that they will, but I hope so. And I think that there's movement in that direction. So I'm optimistic.
Yeah, and let me get this comment in here real quick. Jason over on the Facebook side says this info will be disseminated. Yeah, no kidding. It absolutely will be. That's the goal on the federals, on the ATF side.
Yep.
That's a feature of this. That's not just a goal. That's why they're doing it.
We're seeing it in California, right?
Yeah. And I want to try this. That'll work. Yeah, there we go. That way there's not just a big hole in the screen where the logo there. All right. Let me, and Gerald also says that before that, I don't know, that shuffles us. I don't know if I like that or not. Before Oregon's law went into effect, private sales skyrocketed. To be expected, people understand that there's gonna be some shenanigans, shall we say, going on. There's going to be shenanigans going on, and so before those shenanigans, we're going to take care of this now. So, yeah.
Do you want to go to Pennsylvania?
Let me get this one in real quick. Roderick says the dealer would still have 4473 paperwork of a gun purchased, it seems. there are dealers that do go digital. The last, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, the last time I actually went into a gun store to purchase a gun, it was all digital. So I actually filled out the 4473 on a tablet, and it went all through computers. I didn't fill out a paper.
Paul, one of the reasons for that was there would be minuscule clerical errors. You wrote the name capital CA for California rather than capital C, capital A, or SD, South Dakota. And then people were getting fined for those errors, so people used a digital tablet that would screen to keep the FFL from getting fined.
Yep. Yeah, because if there are capitalization errors, punctuation errors, the ATF can and will go after the FFL.
Yes. Rogue FFLs that don't know punctuation. Oh, God. Who will save us from the misplaced comma?
I'm telling you. I am telling you. Let's see, what story do we want to go to next? You know what? I want to highlight this one. There, story off of Fox 10 in Phoenix. 5.4 million new gun owners in 2021. What's encouraging to me out of that story is 47% of those who were new gun owners asked about training, and of those, and not only did 47% of the people who are new gun owners ask for training, 40% of them got it.
Yep.
That is awesome. That is fantastic. I don't believe we should, just as at the very beginning of the show we talked about training and actors, I don't believe it should be required, but I absolutely positively, as a training junkie myself, I wholeheartedly encourage it.
Yeah, agreed. I think John Lott actually has some statistics on this. For people who don't know who John Lott is, he runs the Crime Prevention Research Center and has wrote the book More Guns, Less Crime. And I don't know the statistics exactly, but I know that he did some research on states that did not have training requirements compared to states who had training requirements, and there was no statistical difference in terms of the violent crime rate or the number of accidents that happened in those states. And I think it's because... Oh, go ahead.
Well, Alec, I think there's even better news than that. We found out that we, as gun owners, as ordinary citizens, we have a self-defense budget. And when the state took less money in fees for licenses, we spent that money on training. And therefore, when we saw constitutional carry, permitless carry, we spent more money on training, which is great news. I think that describes human character. This is a lethal tool. We feel the weight of the gun. And as many of you know, you've seen your students, they go, wow, that was fun. Wow, I have some learning to do. It's just takes about 3 seconds, in my experience, before that message comes home.
There are two things that I love when I'm around new shooters. The first thing, the very best thing, is when you take somebody that's never fired a gun, you take them out for their first shots, and you see that smile come across their face. That is absolute gold right there. The second thing is when they ask you, how can I learn more? What do I need to know? What do I need to do next? Then you know you've created a lifetime of a passion for them.
Yeah, and the other thing that I've noticed in states that have a training requirement is that it's actually more difficult to find quality training, because you have to sift through all the trainers who are in the training business and teaching only to the state minimum requirements. Right. And there are a lot of, unfortunately, bad trainers out there teaching to the minimum standard, so to speak.
Gotcha.
And I think in states without the requirement, it's easier to find quality training.
Well, and Alex, I'm going to ask, I equate this to getting your driver's license. Once they get the state minimum requirement in these states, It's kind of like a driver's license. Well, I passed my driver's license. That's all I need to do for the rest of my life. I don't ever need to go back and retest. Some states make you go retest for a driver's license once you're in your 70s and beyond. But for a concealed carry permit, I went through the training. I went through driver's ed. I'm good for the rest of my life. That's what I see when they have state minimum training requirements. Whereas when there aren't any, when you get real self-defense training, quite often in that training, especially the beginner level classes, they'll say right at the beginning, this is the start. You need to go beyond this. And a lot of people do.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think good training helps instill a sense of personal responsibility. It helps you understand that this is a perishable skill. It's not a responsibility to be taken lightly. This is just the beginning. And in those states that have required training, people, I think, gain a sense of complacency. I've been blessed by the state. I've gotten my license. I've gone through the state required training. I'm good to go for the rest of my life. I think there's a lot of folks like that.
Can I offer you a slightly different point of view? When we went through basic firearms education, that was your driver's permit. That was your learner's permit. So that you could now go to the range, rent a firearm safely, see what fit you. But that was so you could take yourself to school.
Yeah, it's the base. It's the fundamentals, so that you can take those fundamentals and grow in your skill set and responsibility.
All right, we got about 4 minutes, a little less than 4 minutes left in the show. Rob, I want to get to this last story, and I wasn't familiar with it. You're the one that brought it up in show notes. You want to tell us about what Hawaii's doing? This one's ridiculous.
Yes. A number of anti-rights states have seen the writing on the wall. They have realized they will probably lose in their draconian infringement on the right to keep and bear arms. They will have to issue carry permits to ordinary citizens to carry ordinary weapons in ordinary places. And now the question is, how burdensome can they make it? Last week we talked about a New York law that would basically create every place as a prohibited place to carry a firearm. You couldn't carry it to a restaurant, to a bar, on public transportation. You couldn't take it to an airport. Now notice in that law it said we couldn't take it not only as concealed, you couldn't possess it, so it couldn't even be in your luggage. It is a huge step back from where we are now. Hawaii is following suit. They would require 22 hours of training. The license is good for only 6 months. There is no renewal. You reapply and retake the training. And you must carry a stun gun with you so that you have less than lethal alternatives if you carry your firearm concealed. I did not see if that applied to off-duty law enforcement or politicians as well. Usually those are exempt. Those exemptions are often buried in a separate law. I would not be at all surprised.
Wow. Yeah, Hawaii is certainly not a friend to individual liberty, especially when it comes to firearms. And to say that it'll be interesting. I hope that the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association case creates a framework for restrictions like that to be done away with. So I'm hopeful in that regard, at least.
Alec, I think that's eminently doable if a judge says it must be narrowly tailored, it must be effective rather than speculative. So you can't say, I'm going to require that all guns be painted some bizarre color, and all the screws that go in them have to be left-handed, just, to make it a maintenance nightmare. You have to show that that was effective, because none of these bills would pass the effectiveness test.
Agreed. Yeah, if the Supreme Court says that restrictions on the Second Amendment should be subject to strict scrutiny, then yes, they would have to be narrowly tailored and actually accomplish the stated government goal, not just they may, or it seems like they should, but they must actually accomplish the goal.
There you go.
All right, we just got a few seconds left. I want to get to a couple comments. And well, we're going to go over. Just warning you, folks, we're going over. I want to get to a couple comments that have to do with the story we were talking about here just a few seconds ago. But let's get this first one up. Gerald says training requirements also cuts out those who do not have money. Again, I think that's a feature of training requirements, is it does rule out those of lower economic status of participating in the rights. And Art wants to know, do you advocate driver's ed as a law? No. I really don't. How do I put this? I don't. Driver's education in South Dakota right now is extraordinarily expensive. And speaking as someone who, when I was a truck driver, I taught other drivers to drive truck. I know that I am a better teacher than 90% of the people who teach driver's ed, and they teach people to drive four-wheel vehicles that are much, 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 much simpler than driving a big truck. I know I can teach people to drive four-wheel vehicles much better than somebody who's been to college supposedly to teach can teach them to drive four-wheel, because I understand more about driving than these yahoos do. And I also am pretty talented at teaching, although I don't have the state Mother May I teaching degree. So there are people that are better than those that have the Mother May I teaching degree that are out there. I think it's on the people who are getting trained to choose a good trainer. That's what I have to say.
I agree with you, Paul, and I think I could go down a pretty deep rabbit hole with this question about the role of government. So I think it's best to leave it with your statement. Just agree. So I'll leave it there.
Next Friday, Alec will wax poetic on.
Yeah, driver's ed, yes, and the role of government.
Yeah. No, let me just, because I went way deep on that one. Let me just say that I don't think you should have to go through driver's education to get a driver's license. I think you should just be able to go down to the driver's license bureau, demonstrate that you have the ability to safely drive and navigate the streets, and as long as you can prove that you can do that, they ought to give you your driver's license. That's it. So, all right, I am going to just go ahead, and I think we're going to set it aside there, but before I do, this is our weekly bullet, not our daily bullet, so not everybody is going to know who these folks are here beside me. Rob, tell everybody about Self-Defense Gun Stories, and tell everybody about the Slow Facts blog, if you would, please, sir.
Well, each week I host this Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast. I try and make it a little 20-minute snack food of a podcast, not an hour long, Paul. But I do co-host the Polite Society podcast with Paul once a week. My blog is at slowfacts.wordpress.com. Now, it's about almost 10 years old, 1,900 articles, an overnight sensation. From there, the writing's picked up at Amoland, where I get to write the weekly Armed Citizens column.
All right, Alex, you also, you're an attorney, yes, with the Ooley Law Offices in Indiana, but you also do training. Is there anything, it's February, it's not training season in Indiana yet, but is there anything you'd like to push?
Yeah, so in fact, it's actually colder in southern Indiana today than it is in South Dakota, so that's an unusual thing. And we're not outside training today, but yeah, I have a firm with my dad, Mike Ooley. He's been on the Daily Bullet on a number of occasions, and also have a firearms training business with my family. My mom and brother are also involved in that, and we just try to promote individual liberty and personal responsibility, both in our law practice and in our firearms training business. And this week, I've talked about this on a number of occasions on the Daily Bullet, but constitutional carry looks like we might have some promising footing in there in progress, but it looks like it's on life support now. And I would just ask folks, if you're from Indiana, call your representatives and let them know that you expect them to get constitutional carry to the governor's desk and get Governor Holcomb hold his feet to the fire. He's not been a friend to constitutional carry or liberty in general, and he's got higher political aspirations, and I think people should know that they understand he's not been a friend to liberty, and that's not a good position to take when you're trying to get into higher office from Indiana. So please reach out to your representatives and let them know Indiana should be a constitutional carry state.
Absolutely, and let them know if they, depending on, if the elections happen every 2 years, if they've got an election coming up this year, they need to work now. If they've got an election coming up in 2 years, you're not going to forget.
Exactly.
So, all right, and I would like to remind everybody, thank you for watching. Thank you for those of you on podcast for listening. Thank you for everybody who commented and contributed. Even if and we did not get all the comments on the air. It's just, I'm sorry, there's just too many to do that. But thank you, everybody. And if you would, please, if you just stumbled on us, share the show with a friend. We've been continuing to grow. We want to do that, but I'm not going to pay YouTube and I'm not going to pay Facebook to help our show grow. The way we do that is by you going to the range and saying, I caught this show from the Second Amendment Foundation. You need to check it out and share it with a friend. Please, please do that. Come join us next week at 5 p.m. Central Time, Monday through Friday for the Daily Bullet, and next Saturday, we will still be next Saturday at noon for the Weekly Bullet. In 2 weeks, there won't be one because I'll be down in Phoenix helping to broadcast their 2A rally. Until Monday at 5 p.m., everybody, thanks for watching.